urgent, the shocking moment Pope Leo XIV's shadow moved without him. The Vatican wasn't used to Pope Leo XIV's quiet yet. In the days after he was elected on May 8, 2025, there were no big changes to the rules, loud sermons, or big decisions. Yes, there were a lot of people and reporters in the square for his first blessing. But people who were close to him quickly noticed that he moved differently inside the apostolic palace. He was quiet and thoughtful. Most of the time, when he did speak, it was to ask a question that no one had thought to ask. After only 10 days as Pope, he started doing something that wasn't on the official schedule. He started walking the halls at night by himself, without any pomp or circumstance. It began on May 18th after midnight. At the usual time, the lights in the papal room went out, and the Swiss guards thought the Holy Father had gone to bed. But at 12:41 a.m., two people who were outside the Pope floor heard the door open quietly. The Pope came out by himself, with only his cassock and a rosary around one hand. "Just a minute," he said softly. "No need to follow." He moved slowly down the hall of the second loggia, which was a long hall with arched ceilings and a view of St. Peter's Square. Light from the lamps made the floor shine softly. Outside, there was no one in the square. It was damp from light rain, and the stones looked like glass. The only sounds that broke the quiet were the squeak of a shutter far away and the muffled echo of water running through old pipes. Pope Leo stopped in front of the second window on the left. That's where he always stopped. From that spot, you could see the top of the Basilica dome lined up perfectly with the obelisk. This is a view that hasn't changed since Bernini. You can subscribe to the channel if you are a real Christian. Also, leave your name and the place where you are watching this video in the comments so that we can all pray for your life. He stood there with his eyes down and soft breathing. He wasn't sad, but his stance made it look like he was waiting. After a while, he stayed that way. He was calm and still, with his hands behind his back. He had no idea that he was being filmed. All of the papal hallways had discreet monitoring. The Swiss guard almost never looked at video footage unless there was a problem. One tech stopped when he got to camera 7 in the morning, though, during regular checks. As expected, there was the Pope standing still and looking out into the warm light. Then, at 12:47 a.m., something that couldn't have happened did. His shadow moved, but the Pope himself didn't. He could clearly see that the shape moved on the smooth marble floor behind him. It wasn't a distortion, flicker, or trick of light. It took a full step backward and then got down on its knees. It didn't blur or bend. It moved clearly, as if it were bending to something that couldn't be seen. Then it stayed there for 6 seconds, still kneeling and still apart. Then it got up, took a step forward, and went back to where it was under him. Pope Leo didn't move. The tech looked at it 3 more times before calling his boss. Within an hour, the head of security at the Vatican was called. The video was checked, double-checked, and then set aside. There were no problems with the lighting, the video, or the camera. There was just a man standing still while his shadow moved. That afternoon, the head of security asked to meet with the Pope. He walked in with a humble attitude and stills from the movie printed out. Leo read from the Acts of the Apostles while sitting at his desk. The chief said slowly, "Your Holiness, this video was taken last night." We have no idea what to say. Leo looked at the pictures without saying anything. In the frozen frame of himself, he saw himself standing at the window. Then he saw the shadow on the ground. His height and shape were exact, but not his how he stood. He slowly looked up. Was anyone else told about this? "No, Your Holiness. It's just me and one tech." "Yes, please take the technician to a holy, quiet place. Please forgive me." Leo gave a small smile. "To a church, possibly Lo Piano. He touched something he doesn't fully understand yet." The guard said, "Yes." "What about the video?" Leo told her to keep it safe. There is no report or opinion. Keep it. The chief was unsure. What do you remember from last night? How did you feel? Leo didn't answer right away. As he looked past the man, he saw a tall cross next to a bookcase. He finally said, "I felt breath. Not mine, not the wind, just breath on my right shoulder." The guard didn't say anything. Leo put his chin up. "I wasn't by myself." When the Pope went back to his private rooms later that night, he saw a small piece of unmarked parchment folded in half on the floor next to his desk. He turned it over after picking it up. There was no seal or handwriting that he knew, just a line written in faded ink. There are bowls of shadows when the light is still. Leo looked at the words for a very long time. After putting the note between the pages of his breviary, he closed it. He didn't say a prayer out loud. He just said in a whisper, "Let me stand here until all the shadows bow." Pope Leo didn't tell anyone about the note the morning after it showed up. Not even to Monsignor Spataro, his personal secretary, and the guard who brought him his tea. He only let Spataro into his study without knocking. He went from one meeting to the next with quiet precision. He met a visiting bishop from Colombia, blessed a group of French seminarians, and gave a delegation from the Philippines a short private message. But the phrase kept going through his mind in the background the whole time. When the light stays, still the shadows bend. He asked for a small request in the late afternoon. He asked to be able to go into the Vatican mosaic studio. It wasn't a strange visit, but it wasn't a normal one either. The studio is near the Basilica Sacristy, and for hundreds of years craftspeople have taken care of and fixed up the detailed mosaics that decorate St. Peter's. Leo asked for an odd thing. His question was about any new fixes that had been made to the hallway where the shadow had moved the night before. The top mosaicist didn't understand the request. That hallway didn't have any decorations or pictures that needed to be fixed up. The Pope wouldn't give up. In the evening, right before the building closed, they met there. Leo walked slowly down the hall, looking at the marble walls, the dim lights, and the empty areas between the windows. He stopped talking in the middle and pointed to a piece of stone that was about chest high. He asked if anything had ever been added here. The mosaic artist looked at the spot and touched the smooth clay with his hand. "Not at all, Holy Father. But when the man softly pressed against the wall, a hollow sound came back. The eyes of Leo got narrow. "Bring me the historian who is in charge of making changes inside. In peace." Within 20 minutes, a short, red-faced layman named Dottore Cimini showed up with a stack of files in his arms. He nervously bowed and said his name. "Wall," Leo said with his hand. "Was there ever something taken away from this space?" Cimini quickly flipped through a record book marked 2009 to 2013 and took a quick look at his files. He said slowly, "Yes. There was a lantern-shaped metal wall fixture. It was taken down for safety reasons during Benedict XV's rule. Was there a reason for it? I think it's just wires. Who told them to take it down? Look at this." He paused and blinked. Benedict was not there. The record shows that it was moved because of a repair order that was signed by Cardinal Ratzinger. Leo gave him a close look. "Before he was Pope?" "Yes, Father. This post was made in 2003. As of that time, Ratzinger was in charge of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He didn't have control over the lights inside the Vatican. Does the order explain why?" Cimini turned his head away. "I only said it was important, but there is a note made by hand in the margin. Read it." Cimini blinked. "It says, 'Too close to the hinge. Take it off before the weight starts to move.'" "Hinge?" Leo asked. "That's what it says." Leo moved away from the wall. There was no door or joint that could be seen. There was only a smooth curve of plaster. He fired the staff and stood there by himself for a moment, breathing slowly and looking at the blank wall. Then he whispered, "Show me what I'm holding closed." There was no movement. There were no flickers. There was no whisper. But when he turned to leave, he felt something stop him. Not physically, but mentally. It was like a string was being pulled tight between his shoulder blades. He turned around one more time and had a vague feeling that something on the other side of the wall was also leaning against it. He went back to his private church that night. He lit one light, took the note out of his breviary and opened it. He read it again. When the light stays still, the shadows bend. His heart was quiet as he prayed, one beat at a time with his rosary. At the third riddle, the candle next to him flickered, but it wasn't because of the wind. There wasn't any. It flashed toward him. Then he saw something different. Under where the folded note had been, on the inside cover of his breviary, a faint mark had shown up. It wasn't ink or charcoal, just the tiniest bit of gold dust, like something had been pressed into the paper from below. As the candle lit up, he held it up. At first, the form wasn't clear. It looked like a smudge or a curve. But when the light hit it just right, he saw it for what it was. A name that hadn't been written by a person he knew. He knew it wasn't his, though. In the quiet that followed, he whispered the name out loud. The candle stood up straighter, and the flame got taller, as if the name had weight and the air had bowed to it. When the sun came up, the gold mark was gone. The Pope looked over and over, becoming more careful and slowly each time, but the name was no longer there. There was no more faint dust. The paper looked clean now. It looked like nothing strange had ever happened. Even the candle wax had set in a clean way, but Pope Leo felt like he saw something again. The name wasn't very old. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't even from the Bible. It was the name of a bishop, Bishop Emeritus Anselmo Duarte. He had retired 10 years ago and wasn't well known for much other than a short, controversial commission he served on in the late 1990s about Marian apparitions. He had been very quiet in Portugal for most of his life, and even more so in the last few years. In fact, the last thing the Vatican had on file about him was a signature on a paper from 2018, asking to be freed from all public duties. Nothing legal had been written down since then, not even his death. Pope Leo called Monsignor Spataro into his study and had him answer a single question. In what place is Bishop Duarte now? Monsignor took a quick blink. I don't think we know what righteousness is. No one ever said he was dead, but the last place we knew he lived was a Carmelite monastery near Coimbra. Send someone. Not blatantly. I need to know where he is before it gets dark. The order was carried out. After 6 hours, a Vatican representative came back from the monastery, looking pale and confused. Holy people. He's still living, but not quite. People say he hasn't talked in more than a year. He lives in a small cell on the property's edge. No guests or messages. They feed him by hand. Leo only nodded once. Get ready for it. I'm going there. That same evening, Pope Leo XIV left the Vatican in an unmarked car and drove north without an escort, even though he was supposed to be on a spiritual retreat. Spataro was the only one who joined him. Along the narrow road to Coimbra were eucalyptus, trees and stone walls that had been worn down by the wind from the Atlantic. It was already getting dark when they got to the convent. When they saw him, the Carmelites were stunned and kept quiet. There had been no popes there before, not even John Paul II when he went to Fatima many years ago. They led him through the quiet cloister, past statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and down a short stone path that turned slightly to the left, making him feel lost. At the very end of the passageway, there was a plain, slightly bent wooden door. The prior said in a whisper, "This is his room. He hasn't talked." As of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in 2023, not to this point, Leo waited a moment, then put out his hand and knocked. Nothing. He slowly turned the knob. The room was dark and had a narrow bed, a crucifix, and a window that was just big enough to let in the last bit of daylight. A thin man with droopy eyes sat still in a chair, and when Leo walked in, the man's eyes lit up. He spoke in a voice that was cracked from not using it in a while and said, "I told him you'd come." Leo stopped moving. "You already know why I'm here." Duarte gave a small smile. "It's something no one else has ever seen, right?" Leo didn't say anything, but Duarte agreed. The old bishop said in a whisper, "I saw the wall 2 times. When I saw it for the first time, I was a young priest who had just been called. It didn't move, but it watched." Leo asked, "And the second time?" "That second time was the night I quit. I saw something, not a dream. Once more, I walked down that hallway. This time, the wall was broken and I heard weight, like something waking up, coming from inside." Leo got down on his knees next to him. "Who did you tell? I wrote it down once, but the paper got burned." Leo looked at the man's face. It was scratched from years of penance and quiet, but his face didn't show fear. Instead, it showed a strange kind of peace. "What do you think is going on?" Leo asked. Duarte's lips were shaking. "It's not about what's behind, but what can get through, in my opinion." He slowly reached for the table next to his chair. He took a folded piece of cloth out of a drawer. Inside was a simple wooden rosary. The cross at the end was different from any other he had seen. There was no body on it. Only the shape of Christ was burned into the wood, making it look like it came from inside. Leo touched it. It was warm. Duarte got close. "I didn't tell anyone because I thought I was crazy, but now I see it wasn't crazy. I was just getting ready. That hallway isn't a path, it's a wall. Through it all, something is pushing." Leo stood up and closed the cloth. "I'll be back soon. Old." Bishop said one last thing in a whisper as Leo turned to leave. Duarte nodded once. "Since you were already on the other side, your shadow didn't move." On the way back to Rome, there was silence. This wasn't because of secret, but because Pope Leo XIV had nothing more to say. The last whisper from Bishop Duarte kept going through his mind like a bell that wouldn't stop. "On the other side, you were already there." The moon was already high above the dome of St. Peter's by the time they went back through the Vatican gates. To get to the Apostolic Palace, Leo walked by himself. But even though Monsignor Spataro was worried, he kept quiet and followed behind him one step. Leo did not go to his room. He turned left instead and went down the hallway he had been avoiding for weeks because the light had changed and the shadow stayed. When he walked inside, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There was only one silver lamp on the far wall that lit up the hallway. It only had a quiet draft going through it. It was hard to walk on the marble, and there was a faint smell of incense from the evening vespers in the air. He stopped, though. "Do not look up." There was no more of his shadow. He turned around. It was behind him, not next to him. "No, go ahead." He turned 3 times and it moved 3 times. It didn't make sense. It sat there. He moved. It wasn't. He had another. It did, but the other way around. When he stopped again, the hallway seemed to hum for a moment. It wasn't a sound, but a presence, like it wasn't empty and was waiting for something. Leo looked up at the picture on the wall. It showed the Apostle Thomas putting his fingers on Christ's wounds. Thomas wasn't touching this time, though. He was pulling away. Leo opened his eyes. The picture went back to normal. He went back and out of the hallway, his heart racing not from fear, but from recognition. It wasn't just a hallway. There was something on the other side of the veil watching. Over the next few days, Pope Leo went back to his normal job. He went out in public, met with diplomatic groups, and gave 3 small appointments to dioceses in Hungary and Italy. The College of Cardinals didn't see anything strange, but he was going through a change. The rosary was the first thing. He found himself reaching for it, not the official one or the one with the fancy silver beads that a previous pope had given him, but the one Bishop Duarte had given him out of wood, and that had a burned-out Christ on it. His body forced him to pray it every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., even though he didn't want to. He would wake up at that exact time with no noise or alarm and be pulled to his study. As he prayed, he would kneel down in front of the cross and light a candle. Each time he did this, the crucifix on the rosary would get warmer. By the 5th night, it burned his fingers on purpose, not because it hurt. He held on to it better. "Tell me why you brought me here." That was the prayer, he said, over and over, or why me, not lead the church or guide the faithful. On the 6th night, the answer came, but not in the way he thought it would. At 3:17 a.m., he woke up again, knelt down, and prayed again. As he ended the last decade, he looked up at the crucifix on the wall and saw something he couldn't explain. The candle next to him flickered sharply to the left, and the flame curled outward into the air as if something invisible had come into the room. His shadow came back to the wall behind the crucifix, but it wasn't his. It was wider and bigger. The shoulders were off and the head was slightly bowed, but not out of shame. It was out of excitement. Leo got up. The shadow didn't look like him. It moved to the right, not against him, but around him, when he took a step to the left. The shadow turned around all of a sudden, making a wave in the marble. It looked like the wall had turned liquid for a moment, but it was gone again. There was no sound or flash. It was just gone. When Leo pressed his hand against the wall, it was gone. The marble was cold, but in the middle under his palm, a small crack had shown up. It wasn't noticeable to the naked eye, but it felt rough when he touched it. It was a new fracture. By writing in the dust, he slowly took his hand away. Only one person can pass, the person who decides not to. His eyes were fixed on the line, until the candle's wind died out. He then turned around and left the room. He wasn't seen until the next morning, but the next day, a secretary saw something odd. The big crucifix that the Pope had hanging behind his desk had dropped. Right below it, on the floor, was the burned rosary, which was still warm, whole, and ready. By morning, the crack under the wall was no longer noticeable. When Pope Leo came back to the room with 2 trusted helpers, the smooth marble floor had no marks or dust on it. One of the helpers had even put the cross back on the wall without saying a word. Just Leo knew it had gone down and felt the shadow come back, not to his staff or the cardinals, but to himself. That day, he skipped all public events for the first time since being elected and locked the door to his office. The message inside was one of 2 identical ones that were left for each new pope. He took it out of a sealed envelope that he had never opened. Both were written by hand by Pope Clement XIV, who came before him. The first letter was read out, loud in public and given to scholars. The second is private and only for the next servant of Christ. It is always marked the same way and is only for the person who is sitting alone. Leo was slow to open it. He didn't know why until now. As he broke the seal, his hand shook a little. The letter was very short, just over half a page, but every word was very clear. The voice has already found you if you're reading this. I'm not talking about a quiet whisper. We've all heard those. That voice that doesn't ask questions but just waits for you to answer. Leo took his time, sitting down. "It will come when you are still," was written in bold next to the line. "It will come when you don't move. When it does, your shadow will move." Instead, he looked at the ink, at the truth that couldn't be true. Clement knew, or someone else knew before him. There were not many lines left. People in charge did not pick your name. Before the smoke even rose, everyone knew. Mine was too. The person who will follow you was the same way. Do not try to talk to the voice. You shouldn't ask. You should hold on, and if you wait long enough, the cause will stop you. It was just signed C. Leo folded the letter, lit a candle, and set it on fire, not to keep it secret, but because he had to. He prayed. By himself that night in the tomb, he walked by the marble tombs of popes who had died a long time ago. Benedict, Pius, Leo, and John Paul II. He went to the tomb of Clement XV, who came before him. There were fresh flowers there. There was a simple white package next to the stone. It was picked up by Leo. It wasn't marked. There is a piece of paper and one line inside. They will never understand why you were picked to be quiet. In a whisper, he put it back against the tomb, even though he didn't know who had left it there. I think you spoke through him, he said. Now either talk through me, or I'll never say anything again. Something moved when he stood up. It wasn't the breeze or the air. He felt like something had moved behind him. When he turned around, there was no one there but the long hallway that went back to the basilica. There was silence, but the sound of his footsteps could be heard, twice as loud but not echoing. He turned around again, but nothing was there. He slowly left the tomb, went through the bronze gates, and stopped at the painting of Mary holding her broken son. In the marble folds of her clothes, a shadow moved that wasn't his. He stood there, still, stopping. The light from the rock sparkled for a moment, and then stopped. When he got back to his house, something was waiting for him. His prayer book had been opened. The page had been turned to Psalm 39, but he hadn't touched it. He looked right at verse 9. I kept quiet. I wasn't going to say anything because you did it. Someone or something had written in ink that was just a little darker than the page below it. The quiet doesn't mean that God isn't there. That's where he waits to be seen. Leo looked at the page for a very long time. He didn't say a prayer. He just put the book down and knelt next to it. That night at 3:17 a.m., he woke up again, but this time it wasn't from a dream. It was just silence. He stood up in bed and looked to the corner of the room where the floor met the wall. While he was sitting, his shadow stood up straight. He wasn't scared. He didn't move. He watched, and the shadow moved toward him for the first time as a shape that joined into a single line. It wasn't a figure. Then it wrote a sentence on the white wall. There was no pen or hand, just the shadow making words like air on a mirror. The voice isn't coming. There was always this voice. Then it was gone, and his own shadow came back, this time lined up with his body. In a low voice, he asked the darkness, if you were always here, why did I ever stop listening? There was no answer. All that could be heard was the wind hitting the outside glass. The staff did notice something odd in the morning, though. A window in the Pope bedroom had been opened, and there was a single black feather on the windowsill. It was still warm and shaking like something had just flown away with it. He left the feather on his windowsill for 3 days. He didn't move it, tell the Swiss guards to look at it, or tell his maid to clean it. He just left it there. A black feather that was still a little warm, even though it was early May and cold. By the 4th day, it was gone. Not a gust of wind or a bird had claimed it. It just disappeared. Leo started to understand something he had only feared before. The voice, presence, and silence that made his shadow move wasn't strange. It was old, not new, not on its way. It was already here. That night, Cardinal Stojan came to see him again without warning. He was the only one who saw Leo's hands shake and didn't say anything about it. He was the only one who didn't ask anything but saw everything. Stojan said in a soft voice, "You didn't call anyone to the balcony for 4 days." Leo answered, "I have nothing to say. When will you speak?" "When I know it's not me." He took a look at the Pope's hand. "The last time you wore the fisherman's ring was during the 2nd week of Easter." "No? Why?" Leo sat down on the edge of his desk and turned away from the fire. Stoyan did not say anything because it was no longer what held him together. In the desk drawer below, Leo reached down and took out a small wooden box, an open piece of linen inside. He slowly opened it up, showing a strange object inside. It looked like a signet ring, but it was blackened not from age, but from fire. It was the same ring that had been on his finger before it went missing and came back weeks later, forever darker. Even though it was in a box, it was still warm when he touched it. Stoyan made a funny face. "It's still alive," Leo didn't answer. He went along the inside band with his thumb. That's where a new line showed up, carved in deeper than ever. "One day, the quiet you guard will speak louder than the voice that cursed it." Stoyan got the ring from him. "Tell me that was made by men." He thought about it for a moment and then slowly shook his head. "I've worn all the different rings a bishop can wear. My hand was never burned by something that wasn't fire." Leo took it back, looked at it, and then said, "It burns because I was meant to feel it." After putting the feather down, he put the ring on the windowsill and left it there. It was gone by the next morning. But there was something else there instead. It was a piece of torn and bent paper that was clearly folded with care. Leo took it open. Only 8 words were written by hand in a small, steady writing. "He didn't leave you." He took a step back. There were 3 times he folded the paper and put it in the inside of his cassock. That night he did something without telling anyone. We only need a request, not a broadcast or a church. He asked to say Mass in a jail outside of Rome. The Pope said, "They are the only ones who will understand why I need to speak." Even his secretary was surprised by the request. He got there in silence. There was no papal fanfare or parade. There was only him in white walking into the cement chapel of Rabibia jail. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't preach. He just read the gospel. Something happened when he lifted the host to bless it. A man in the 4th row who is spending 20 years in prison for armed robbery let out a gasp. There wasn't much of a glow around the host, just enough to blur the air around it, like heat rising off of concrete. The man went up to the Pope after Mass. He was shaking as he talked. I saw it. It was fire. It didn't bother Leo. He put his hand on the man's shoulder and told him, "You weren't supposed to see me." The prisoner blinks and then nods. That's right. Leo went back to the Vatican, but his shoes were dirty and he didn't say a word. He didn't say anything for 2 more days, but his shadow moved again on the 3rd day. This time he prayed in the church while sitting still with his eyes closed and his hands open. But the shadow to his left got up, walked, and stood still. Stopped next to the crucifix on the other side of the wall and pointed not at Christ, but at the writing above him that said, "Inri." Leo slowly got up and walked toward it. As he got closer, the light changed, but it wasn't from the candles. It came from something behind the shadow, a more rounded form. It wasn't a person. It looked more like the mark of someone who had stood there a long time ago, a memory thrown into the air. He reached out and touched it. Just before the light went out, for a split second, he felt warmth hold, not burn, his fingers. The shadow was gone when the candles went out again, but the ring was on the marble floor at the base of the cross. He stood there, knelt, took it in both hands, and said out loud, "If you're still here, I won't move." He didn't say it as a priest or a pope, but as a man. There was no wind outside that night, and the guards said they could only hear the faint sound of wings circling high. Above the Vatican, not moving, waiting, the windows of the Apostolic Palace stayed open well past midnight. Pope Leo XV left the windows of his private church open for 3 nights after the ring came back. He did this not to let the wind in, but to let whatever had come to him that night know it was still welcome. There was no wind and no bird came back, but something else happened. The crucifix in the church, the one above the simple marble altar, looked a lot like the one he had prayed in front of before the shadow moved. It had always been known for being very quiet. The corpus was carved in 1835 and has been worn down by candle smoke. It is in a wood frame that hasn't been touched in many years. But the first night after Leo prayed, a very small crack emerged along the top of the crossbeam. It was only a hairline and was brand new. The next morning, the sacristan saw it and quietly told someone about it. The Pope just smiled. Allow it to be. By the third night, there was a second crack, this time running down the beam behind Christ's shoulder. And by the fourth morning, something had fallen onto the altar cloth that wasn't plaster or wood. It was a fingertip-shaped flake of deep brown paint. Leo looked at it himself. It had a light scent of olive oil and something else, like ash. No one was asked to look into it. He did not say to put the cross back together. He just took the flake, put it in a small cloth bag, and set it next to the chalice on the altar. At noon, he called a man he hadn't talked to in more than a year, Father Luis de Campos, who was an exorcist in secret. Luis had never had a real job at the Vatican. He moved quietly along the edges of the church as he worked in regions under bishops. Leo knew him from a long time ago, though. A mission in Ecuador, a night in a church where the walls leaked salt water, and a woman who spoke perfect Hebrew even though she had never been to school. Luis was shocked when he got to Rome. Holy Father, I thought you had forgotten about me. Leo didn't smile as he looked at him. I haven't forgotten anything, even the things I wish I could remember. They went to the church by themselves and met. Leo told him about the ring, the shadow, the voice, and then there was quiet. Luis just listened, not with wide eyes or doubt, but with his mind still. Luis only had one question when Leo was done. It said your name, right? Leo wasn't sure. No, Luis said. Then it wasn't sent to let you know, it was sent to see if you could stand. What does that mean? Luis said in a soft voice that it means you're not being tempted. Someone is watching you. Leo felt a chill go down his spine. How? At first, Luis didn't say anything. Then who knew this would happen before you did? The cross above them made a soft, deep creak during the last blessing. It wasn't loud, but it sounded like wood giving. Into time. It was there when Leo looked up. Just below the carving of Christ's right eye, a single dark, oily bead had shown up. It clung to the top, then fell, and with a soft pat landed next to the chalice. Luis bent down to look, touched it, and smelled it. He then turned to look at the Pope. It's not blood. What is it? As a warning, Luis stood up. That's where you need to be. Leo opened his eyes. The holy place? Yes. Tonight. Why? Luis looked at him straight on. While the house waits for another move, it moved once before. Leo left the Vatican that night in complete silence. Not a guard or a big deal. He got to Laredo just after midnight. The rector had been told in a quiet way that the basilica was closed and that the chapel was open. The Holy House, a simple stone building thought to have been the home of the Virgin Mary after she magically moved there from Nazareth, was dark and quiet. Leo knelt right next to the door. This time it was colder than he remembered. He didn't say anything or pray. He did nothing but listen. 10 minutes later, something moved. Not a sound, but a presence. He turned around and saw his shadow on the wall of the Holy House, just to the left of the small window. He hadn't moved, though. It was the shadow. It moved along the stone, but not in time with his breathing or body language. It went across the floor and stopped at the altar in the middle. It didn't raise its hand to bless, but to point down. Leo got up and walked to where the shadow pointed. Just under the altar cloth, tucked away, was a folded cloth that wasn't a treasure and was still a little warm. He opened the ring and saw that it wasn't black or warm anymore. Instead, it was clear, as if it were cut from crystal and had engravings all around the edge. You don't wear the fire, you give it to someone else. Leo shook for the first time in weeks. He then got down on his knees, but not to pray, but to wait, because something had changed. He could no longer take the weight by himself. He was now getting ready to give it away. The crystal ring stayed with him. It wasn't on his hand. Yet, Pope Leo XIV kept it in the same small cloth pouch that held the broken crucifix's paint flake. Both of them stayed with him by his heart because he put them in the inside pocket of his cassock. Back in Rome, he didn't say anything in public. He went about his business as usual, met with groups and smiled for the cameras, but there was something different about him that most people couldn't put their finger on. It was a weightiness and quietness that seemed to follow him around like his shadow, which he knew because he had seen it move. It waited now. He started having the same dream every night. He was at the base of the Scala Sancta, which are the holy stairs that are thought to come from Pontius Pilate's house and were used by Christ during his crucifixion. But in the dream, the steps weren't made of marble, they were made of ash. And every time Leo got to the 7th step, he heard the same voice say, "Now look behind you." He would turn around, but all he saw was nothing. Leo made a choice on the 3rd night, when he woke up sweaty and alone. He called Father Luis again, but this time he didn't want help. Instead, he wanted to give him a direction. "You need to get the Church of St. Sylvester ready by midnight. It hasn't been used in years." Luis just bowed and left without asking why. 1 candle was in each corner of the church by midnight, and 8 more were placed along the sides of the altar. Leo walked in by himself. He wasn't dressed like a pope. He was just wearing a black cassock, and the cloth pouch was still on his chest. After he knelt, he did something that no pope had ever done before. He got a pen and started to write his resignation. It wasn't signed or dated yet, but he did it. He then folded it up, put it under the crystal ring on the altar, and whispered, "If you gave this to me for a season, tell me when to stop." The ring didn't glow, but something else took place. One of the lights went out on its own, with no wind or draft to be found. Then there was a second and then a third, until there was only one left, the one on the far right of the altar. Its flame flashed and then leaned sharply toward the middle. Like pressure from below the stone, Leo looked down and saw a single word start to appear on the altar's surface. It was etched, not drawn, just one word. Still, he just looked at it and didn't say anything. After a long pause, he asked, "Are you still here?" The flame bent again and then went out. The next morning, the ring was back in its pouch, like it had never been taken out. He had left the church without it. Later that same day, his secretary came in with a letter in an envelope brought by hand from Krakow, Poland. It came from the Carmelite order there, written by a nun who lives alone. In the letter it said, "Your shadow has reached us." She had never met the Pope and had never left the convent. Even though it didn't say anything, it stood next to the crucifix in our church, pointed to Jerusalem, and faced east. Leo read it twice and then flipped the envelope over. The date, March 13th, the day he went into the Church of St. Sylvester, was written on the back. On the same night, the nun had seen his shadow in Poland. Then he pressed the letter to his lips and said out loud, "Then I need to go." Even though Vatican staff members complained, security said it was dangerous. It was too hard and dangerous to go to Jerusalem, especially without warning. It didn't bother him. By the end of the week, Pope Leo had quietly set up a small journey for just 3 people, Father Luis, his assistant, and a Latin Patriarchate driver from the area. They got to Jerusalem on a clear Friday morning without any clothes or press. They went right to the Holy Sepulchre Church. Leo walked barefoot past the altars and murals until he got to the place called Golgotha, which is the altar on top of the rock where the cross used to be. He got down on his knees. It wasn't caught on camera. No reporter wrote about it. Samir, The guard on duty was a Coptic Christian. He afterwards swore to his bishop that he saw something that no one could explain. Leo pressed his face against the stone, but the shadow that was cast behind him did not match his frame. It stood with its arms outstretched like it was on a cross. It was gone when Samir blinked. Leo went back to his hotel later that night. When he opened his breviary, there was a new piece of paper stuck between the pages. The only thing on it was the same word that he had seen carved into the altar. He dreamed again that night, though. The same steps, the same sound. When he turned around this time, though, someone was already there. He didn't know the face, but he knew the person was there. It said, "The wall will open if you leave now." Leo woke up right away, lit a candle, and put the ring close to the flame. The crystal didn't glow, but it stayed. "Clear," he said in a whisper. "Then I'll stay. I'm only doing it because you haven't told me to stop." That night he didn't sleep again. But when dawn came, the shade under his window wasn't by itself anymore. It had joined with another one that was the same, still and waiting. The Pope's secret trip to Jerusalem was never in the news. It was handled too carefully and kept too quiet on purpose. But being quiet doesn't mean keeping something secret. Within days, rumors spread to parts of the church that not many people. See? One of them is a monastery built into the rocks near the Kadisha Valley in northern Lebanon. There, an old Maronite abbot named Elias Barakat rang the old monastery bell 3 times without notice. He was almost deaf and had been retired from public worship for a long time. It hadn't been rung in many years. He was crying in the library. When the younger monks came running in, he didn't say anything. He only pointed to the old book that was open on the desk. It was a book written by Maronites in the 1600s. Not many people could read it. But the youngest of them, Father Anthony, translated, "During the time of the silent fire, the person who walks in shadow will go to the place of the skull. That gate will crack but not break, and he won't go in. He'll just watch." Father Anthony had no idea what it meant, but Abbot Elias kept saying the same thing over and over, shaking as he did it. He didn't get down on his knees by the tomb. He got down on his knees by the cross. Pope Leo XIV was already getting ready to go back to Rome. The crystal ring had stayed still, feeling cool to the touch and keeping its clarity. When his plane flew over Italian airspace, though, it pulsed once, but not with heat. Instead, it pulsed with light, just a flicker, like a lighthouse remembering what it's for. He kept it close to his chest and prayed. He didn't talk or sleep. When he got back to the Vatican, he found a note waiting for him in his private area. It was on plain paper and had only one line on it. It had been folded once, and there was no signature or seal. The wall sighed when your shadow hit the stone. Leo wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew someone who might. That evening, he asked to meet with Sister Beatrice. In the chapel of the archivists, where she was waiting, not even most cardinals have been before. She wasn't up when he got there. She only said, "You walked where he died." Leo said, "Yes, I didn't get any of it." Beatrice took a book off her lap and opened it. It was bound in leather. There was a thin sheet of vellum inside, tucked between 2 parchment pages. The ends of the sheet were burned. She moved it forward. It was Leo's. The piece was only about 2 inches wide, but the words were clear. "If he kneels in the city of the skull and the second light stays on, you'll know that the wall is still shut." Beatrice said in a low voice, "That writing is more than 300 years old. It has been waiting for someone to do it." Leo made a face. "I did well on a test. That was all Beatrice could do. Number of times you faced it. There's a change." He sat down next to her. Then he slowly took off the crystal ring for the first time and put it down between them. Since then, it hasn't talked. It was not touched by Beatrice. After giving it a long look, she asked, "Do you know what kind of crystal this is?" Leo turned his head away. She gave a small smile. I don't either, and neither does anyone else. We tried it out once. We don't know of any crystal that isn't quartz, diamond, or man-made. It doesn't belong there. He let out a breath through his nose. That seems about right. It was Beatrice who pulled out a small package from her robe. It was sent to the library 3 days ago. There is no return address, but I think you should see it. Leo slowly opened it. There is one picture inside. Grayscale, grainy, and taken from a very high place. The Vatican gardens could be seen from above. The Pope is in the middle, sitting on a bench. The picture was taken from behind, but it wasn't his shadow. He sat down and it stood up. The apostolic house was shown by one hand. The other one seemed to hold something, even though it was impossible. Something small and round. Leo took a deep breath. Written by hand in pen on the back of the picture. It's now following you. He looked up. Where did this come from? Beatrice's face turned darker. That picture is number 2. What do you mean? She took out a second package from her robe, opened it, and took out a picture that looked a lot like the first one. The yard and bench are the same, but there is no shadow at all. Leo is the only one. It was written in the same handwriting on the other side. This is the real one. We need to figure out which picture is real, Leo asked as he looked at both of them. She didn't answer Beatrice. She gave him a third thing instead, a thin piece of old yellowed paper with pencil writing that is hard to read. The wall is not a wall when the light doesn't cast a shape, and the shape casts light instead. It's a veil, Leo said in a whisper. Beatrice closed the book behind it, something that was supposed to be hidden and never been seen. Leo was by himself in his study that night. A crystal ring sat on the windowsill and caught the moonlight. His shadow stood still on the wall next to him for a second before raising its hand and pointing west. It was just another day on May 30th, 2025. Rome slowly moved. Pilgrims got together. The early sun made the basilica shine, and Pope Leo XIV woke up in the apostolic house before his staff arrived. But something wasn't right. The room didn't feel empty, but it did feel like it was being watched, not by eyes, but by memories. He got up, washed, and dressed himself without help. When he turned around to look out the window, he saw it again. Its shadow was still and steady, but it didn't follow him as he moved forward. Not fully detached, but delayed. It stayed, barely. Noticeable even in the early light. Try to remember how to be a sound like an echo. The moment was over when he blinked. Later that same day, Sister Beatrice sent a sealed letter. There is no letter inside. There is only an old, crisp page that is burned at the edges. He had seen that phrase before, but not in this form. Someone who doesn't make a shadow is either too close to the light or already is it. The page was folded and put into Leo's breviary. He went into the apostolic chapel by himself that night as the sun went down behind the roof of St. Peter's. There are no computers, lights, or rings. The crystal ring that had pulsed, disappeared, and then reappeared stayed in its satin case for 2 days without being touched. He hadn't worn it since the picture, not because he was afraid, but because he respected it. But that night, he brought it with him. He knelt down next to the altar and put it there. Then he prayed, "If I was only meant to hold, then take it. Now, talk if you want to say something. If being quiet is the answer, then let it ring like thunder." There was no light, no spark, and no shadow movement. He stayed there for 2 hours. As the midnight bell started to ring, there was a movement like a breeze out of nowhere. No doors had opened, but all the candles were leaning toward the altar and the ring. In the shifting light, the crystal slowly started to fog up as if breath had fogged it from inside. Leo looked. He didn't touch it. The ring pulsed once, twice, and then a third time. Then it cracked but not broke. There was a single crack across the face of the ring, like lightning frozen in glass, and a shimmer of gold came from the middle of the crack. Leo reached forward, but not to take it. He did it to look inside the crystal, which was now lit up by something he couldn't see. Letters started to show up that weren't carved or etched, but rather float in the air like they were in oil. They wrote down words he didn't expect. "You don't have to carry this," he said in a whisper. "It was never yours." "Then why should you give it to me?" The answer wasn't text. It was deeper than usual silence. In that silence, he heard something he hadn't heard in months. His own name, spoken not out loud but recognized, not as a title, but as a person, just Leo. The ring then broke apart, not burned, not melted, but broken apart, as if it had never been made of matter at all. The gold inside rose up and disappeared into the dark air. All that was left on the altar was a single line of clean, straight ash that looked like a wound on a white piece of cloth. He reached out and touched it. It was warm. He put it on his forehead in the shape of a cross, and then stood up. He didn't tell anyone about what happened the next morning, not even Sister Beatrice or the Secretariat. He didn't even write about it in his own diary, but in his study, next to the case that used to hold the ring, he left one last note that wasn't signed or sealed. It said, "I wasn't picked to lead with signs. I was picked to stand where the signs end." As Rome slept that night, a single page came free from an old archival ledger. It was this page that had written the name Leo XIV almost 100 years before he was born. It fell to the ground without any windows open or a hand nearby. The ink on the page had changed. It used to say, "He will be the wall," but now it said, "He was." Below that, in younger ink, there was a final word that was sealed. The Pope went for a walk by himself in the Vatican grounds the next morning. His robe was white and the sun was strong. This time, when he turned the corner near the statue of St. Joseph, his shadow followed him exactly. There was no pause or hesitation. There was just a man and the light. Share, like, and follow the channel if you like this message so you can see more heartwarming videos. May the light of hope always be with us. Goodbye. See you soon.